In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you why New Orleans tanked their game against the Dallas Mavericks perfectly, and also answered a big question about the future at the same time. It's today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Thursday, day after the Pelicans lose. Weird ending to this one, kind of. 137-136, not quite as close as the final score indicates, but this was a close game, and the Pelicans lost it in perfect, I'm telling you, perfect fashion if you're in favor of them tanking. I'll explain. Plus, they did answer a big question about the center position, rebounding in this game. That's going to matter for the future, and then it's trade rumor season. That means watch out. We got a whole lot to talk about in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans only fans. Oh, that sounded weird. On YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. So let's get into this one. 137-136 loss to the Dallas Mavericks. If you're in favor of this team tanking, this is a perfect loss. This is a perfect loss. So one, it was a close game, competitive. No Luka Doncic for the Dallas Mavericks, no Derek Lively the second either, no Dante Exum, no Maxi Kleber, no Dwight Powell. They were having some injuries there, but you're competitive against a team that's good, at the very least, that still has Kyrie Irving and some of these other guys here who are very good. Daniel Gafford loves playing against the New Orleans Pelicans, by the way. So there's talent on that team. Klay Thompson, and you were within a point. You had a chance. You were up 8 in the second half of this game. So the fact that it's just a competitive loss, not down 15 to start the game like we've seen them regularly do, that's, I don't want to call it an encouraging sign because I think we're kind of past some encouraging signs at this point. It just means you're competitive and it wasn't like you got blown out. And frankly, that's just a good thing, as simple as that. But you also had good scoring nights from all your important players. The starting lineup in this one actually won their minutes, which is really worthwhile and something that we want to see. DeJounte Murray, 27 points. CJ McCollum, 23 points. Zion Williamson, 29 points. Trey Murphy III, 32 points. Your starters, other than Misi, all scored in 20 or more points. The team had 8 total turnovers. They had 6 just as a starting unit. Overall, that's really good production. Everyone shot well, shot the 3 ball well. They made their free throws too, which is a really important thing. The Pelicans only had 3 misses on the night. The starters, only Zion missed 2, and he was 7 of 9. That's good for him. Everyone had assists. Zion with 7, Trey with 4, CJ with 8, Murray with 6. They limited the turnovers. There were stretches of good defense. Look, Misi struggled, I thought, mightily in this game. 0 for 4, didn't score a point for the second straight game, but had 4 blocks here as well. Your starters played well. So you lost, which is good for the tank, good for Cooper Flagg and some of those other top draft picks, and your starting lineup played well. That's about as good as it gets here. They lost this game really with 2 players and just some minutes from those guys, and that was Daniel Tice and Brandon Boston Jr. The Daniel Tice minutes, almost 18 and a half of them were rough. He was a minus 16 on the night. He was not good in this game. He was not good. No defense, got outworked offensively too. Just not good. Now, the Pelicans don't really have another option. You'd say, oh, well, you're playing Daniel Tice, you're tanking. The other option is Jeremiah Robinson Earl. And I don't think that's necessarily any better. So there really isn't another option. Right now, your center is Misi, Daniel Tice, and Jeremiah Robinson Earl. It's a little not great there, putting it mildly. More on that in the next segment. You also lost the Brandon Boston Jr. minutes pretty handily as well. He was a -12. Those are the only two guys that were a double-digit plus negative plus minus here. Brandon Boston Jr. had 12 points. He was 5 of 11 shooting, but multiple times you saw him just not get the ball to Zion Williamson and take like a contested mid-range jumper or just go ISO the whole possession and not really look for others. This is someone who took 2 shots from 3. That's good. Took some shots at the rim, but then shot 4 bad mid-range jumpers that just don't need to be in his shot diet. And if you're taking those shots, it's one thing if it's like a bailout at the end of the shot clock. It's another when Zion's right there, and at one point there were 2 possessions where he just didn't look for Zion whatsoever. So bad Daniel Tice minutes, bad Brandon Boston Jr. minutes. If you're looking to try and kind of scapegoat the loss, like who do we blame? There's a lot more blame than just boiling it down to 2 players, but you could easily point right there, and that kind of lets guys like Zion, Trey, and others a little bit off the hook. While I think it was good that they scored what they did, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, CJ, and DeJounte, the rebounding, which we'll get into in the next segment, isn't good. Zion had 2 defensive boards. Trey had 6. Like that front court, Misi had 4, right? You're kind of 3 front court starters playing the majority of your minutes only have a total of 12 defensive rebounds. That's not going to cut it. The numbers for second chance points for the Dallas Mavericks in this game, which we'll get into more in the next segment, they're going to make your eyes pop out of your head. I'll share those with you coming up here next. You know, the other thing that you saw them struggle to do here is they didn't shoot enough threes. They took 31. The Dallas Mavericks took 43. New Orleans was shooting the 3 ball well. Some of them were a little bit more miraculous in a sense. You know, 1 or 2 heaves from Jose, same for CJ right at the end. But they were 15 for 31. That's almost 50%. That's 48.4%. You actually outshot the Dallas Mavericks from 3 in terms of percentage. They were 20 for 43. That's 46.5%. They need to generate more of these looks and not just devolve into kind of the bad offense that we've seen. This goes to the Brandon Boston Jr. minutes, some of the Daniel Tice minutes too. But if you're trying to tank, even if they're not trying to tank, say you want them to tank, perfect when it comes to that, because this is how you lose a game while your star players look good, whether it's to bump up their trade value or because you want to keep them. The starting unit looked pretty good together overall, and you still lost the game and you didn't lose ground in the tank for flag. That SAG for flag, I forget what the hashtag is. One of those things where you're trying to get a top draft pick. So overall, just a very good tanking performance. If you want them to win, this is a little bit frustrating because there's so many things they could easily clean up, and for whatever reason, all season long they haven't. But if you want them to lose, you want competitive losses, you want Zion to look good, you got that in this game. But the rebounding is an issue, and I think this does answer a question for next season. And right now it should be all about next season. So getting some clarity on this, I think, is a really important thing. I want to look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worrying. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And if you're an everydayer, this is you, Nick. You need to comment down below for me. Let me know that you're an everydayer. And also, don't forget about the free daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. You can sign up for the free the free Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. There we go. It's a little late. Getting out of the garage was a little bit tough with some of the traffic and all the Super Bowl stuff. So I'm a little tired here. So go subscribe to the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage. So let's look at this, something that really lost New Orleans the game. 137-136 to the Dallas Mavericks here. And it's the offensive rebounding. It's the offensive rebounding for Dallas, defensive rebounding for New Orleans. This has been a struggle all year long. And I was talking to David Grubb of Hard in the Paint before the game, and he mentioned something that I kind of liked the way he described it. The Pelicans just feel small, don't they? They just feel kind of small. He's not wrong. If you've looked at some of these games they've played recently against pretty strong, physical, like bruisier, bigger centers, New Orleans has struggled, and you're seeing Yves Missi like really hit that rookie wall. It is tough, especially for a big man, to go from playing like 30-something games in college to an 82-game season in the NBA while you're trying to learn and get adjusted to just tougher opponents and all that. Being a rookie's tough in the NBA. And you're seeing that here. Missi struggled in this one, and Daniel Gafford was really, the big perpetrator on this. Missi, by the way, went 0 for 4, not a single point in this one. 3 offensive boards, 4 defensive boards, so 7 total rebounds, about 4 blocks. He had a plus-minus of 13, so that says something. But you're seeing him struggle, and without the Pelicans center doing the majority of defensive rebounding work, a la Jonas Valanciunas last year, they don't team rebound, and they're a little small. Look, Zion Williamson, 6'6". 6'6". He's not going to be an elite rebounder, even if we want him to be, even if he plays a small ball 5 or a power forward. He just doesn't have the height for that. What makes him such an elite offensive rebounder is not his height or anything like that. It's his just timing of the second jump. And maybe he can time his defensive boards a little bit better, but when you're out of position trying to go for those because you're being boxed out, and there's less of that when you're getting your own offensive misses, offensive rebounds, you see the struggle here. 2 defensive boards from him. That number should be higher, but I'm not expecting Zion to be like a 10 defensive rebound guy on a nightly basis. Trey having 6, for being a front court player is fine, but when you're struggling with it in other regards, you just got to make up this ground somewhere. And the Pelicans don't really have an answer to that with this roster. It's going to need to come from the center position. It's not going to be Zion. It's not going to be Trey. It's not going to be any of those other guys. And you saw it in this game where the Dallas Mavericks had 15 or 16 offensive rebounds. It was 16 here. And that led to 32 second chance points. So basically multiply it by 2. Basically every offensive rebound they got, more or less they got it and put it back up and scored. They outscored New Orleans 32-13 in second chance points in this one. Every other metric New Orleans did really well in. Points in the paint was 56-54 for the Dallas Mavericks. That's fine. That's basically a wash. New Orleans won the fast break points 23-14, turning defense to offense before the defense fell apart in the third quarter right there. Second quarter was actually really good, and New Orleans was up 6 points at halftime. But it was that offensive rebounding, 32 second chance points, not ending possessions, killed New Orleans in this game. We can point to all the other stuff, right? Like we could point to the bad offense from Brandon Boston Jr. We could point to the Daniel Tice minutes. It was the rebounding. The problem is New Orleans doesn't have an answer to this, and it's not as simple as like Zion needs to rebound more. Like, of course he does. Everyone on the team you could say that about. But is that a realistic thing to expect? And I don't think it is. And in a sense, it shows that maybe Jonas Valanciunas, despite his defensive limitations, defensive rebounding is still defense that ends possessions, gets you the ball. It's defense. So even if he's not good as a one-on-one individual defender, the fact that he hoovered up rebounds really does say something. And the Pelicans are very much missing that, and Missi is just not there or ready for that kind of role and responsibility at all right now. And so this is something that I've been talking about for a couple of weeks now. The everydayers know this. They probably need to upgrade the center position. And I think these past couple of games have like really proven it. Missi struggled against Zach Edey. You're going to see him 4 times a year. Daniel Gafford, PJ Washington, Derek Lively II. Missi looked small against them. You've got Şengün in this division too. There's a lot of big centers, and New Orleans doesn't really have an answer to any of the issues there right now. So whether that's someone they draft, depending on where that draft pick falls, or trying to go and make a move for more team rebounding, that's going to be a really important thing for New Orleans to figure out. I'm still very high on Misi. He's far more advanced as a player than we thought he was going to be. But look, Daniel Gafford went 9 of 9 in this game, had 12 boards, 7 defensive, had 22 points. PJ Washington, different kind of player, plays bigger than he is. 10 of 20, 4 of 7 from 3, 25 points. He was tied for the leading scorer with Kyrie Irving. Had Derek Lively played and some of these other guys played, I think it would have been just as bad, if not worse. And maybe New Orleans is a little bit lucky that Lively didn't play in this game. But you're seeing the limitations of Misi for now. He will grow. He will improve. It won't stay like this forever. But you can see he needs to, you just see the work that needs to be put in. He's a rookie. This isn't a knock on him. He shouldn't be having that kind of impact right now for the team. Maybe a little bit later, he was impactful early on in the year, but this is just kind of how it goes. And so it's kind of the usual, but it does say you need to go and get someone in the off season. Maybe that involves a Brandon Ingram sign and trade if he's not moved at the trade deadline. More on that in the next segment and in tomorrow's show too. But you can see if now Gafford kills New Orleans. Jim Eichenhofer of Pelicans.com mentioned it to me before the game, where Gafford for his career has one game below 50% shooting from the field against New Orleans. Anywhere he's been, which is just an incredible stat. That dude just plays well against New Orleans. So this is an issue. You can't give up 32 second chance points. That killed sort of any kind of momentum New Orleans had in this one. That killed any chance they had of closing the door. They were up 8 points in the third quarter and weren't able to finish it out because you weren't getting it done with defense. If you were getting those stops, if you were getting, the possessions back, terminating those possessions, you could have done it, but they didn't in this game. And that's the biggest reason why they lost, which again, maybe is great. If you want them to tank, if you want them to lose, that can be a really good thing. New Orleans was losing some ground when it comes to the race for the top picks. Look, no one's going to out-tank Washington right now, who's 6-40. Ooh. Utah is 10-35. They've lost 7 in a row. They're 1-9 in their last 10. New Orleans had been on a winning streak. Now they've lost 4 in a row, and they're kind of right back in there. They were losing ground to Charlotte. Potentially. They were losing ground on the Utah Jazz. You've got to get a top, ideally 4 pick, has to be top 5. Even if the odds are the same, Washington can't finish worse than 5th. New Orleans could drop to 7th right now. That's not great. So losing is important, even if the odds for the 3rd and 4th pick are the same. Would you rather the 7th or 8th pick? Rather the 7th. It's really that simple. Rather the 5th than either of those two. So losing games, good thing for New Orleans right now. So, like I said, it's kind of a perfect loss in a way. Let me know what you thought about this loss. Good loss, bad loss, you tell me in the comments down below. But I do think getting an answer of David Griffin there watching this game probably has to be thinking, probably over the past couple games, we got to go and get a center. We've got to finally make that move to get the big time center that we want, whether it's Jarrett Allen, whether it's Myles Turner or somebody else. It's time to go and do that move this off season if you want to be truly competitive next year. Because again, you can see the makings of a good team here. It needs to be put together better. That might be coaching, all of that stuff, but it's missing 1 or 2 pieces too that really would elevate them. And a defensive rebounding center that can ideally shoot threes and rim protect. So many of those guys in the league, is something that they really need to try and look at least with the defensive rebounding. They're 29th in the league in terms of defensive rebounding rate this season. It'll probably drop to 30 after this game. I wouldn't be surprised when that stat updates. You got to do something. Got to do something basically is what we're seeing. But good loss for New Orleans if you want them to lose. So let's switch gears, do a little bit of trade talk coming up in the next segment here. More just kind of what to expect to see over the next week or so, because right now we are a week away from the NBA's trade deadline. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. Look, going to live events, whether it's this game, whatever it might be, is just fun. It can be an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. And so Game Time can make that happen. Game Time is my go-to ticketing app because I love all of the features that they have. And they have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to only show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Look, there's a great deal on courtside tickets, really good lower bowl tickets right now. So whenever someone wants to go to a Pelicans game, I tell them to download the Game Time app. And if you're going to a place you've never been before, maybe you're going for a theater show, a comedy show, a concert, a venue you've never been to, you get to see the view from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And don't forget about Locked On Saints. Kellen Moore, the next head coach. Is it Mike Kafka? It's all going to be over at the Locked On Saints podcast. The latest updates there on the head coaching search. He's also at the Senior Bowl, bringing you exclusive insight that you can't get anywhere else. So subscribe to Locked On Saints wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's wrap up talking about trade season a little bit here. Don't believe everything you read or hear in the next coming days. I'm just going to tell you all this right now, that there are a lot of people who like to grift and pretend sources and all that just to get some eyes on them. There's not going to be a big move here in New Orleans. We'll talk more about it tomorrow. I want to look at like De'Aaron Fox. A couple of y'all have asked about Sabonis and what I think about that. And we'll get into more of that because I actually do think De'Aaron Fox, even if he doesn't come to New Orleans, is going to impact the Pelicans at the trade deadline. And we will get into that in tomorrow's show. I think there's a couple of things you got to be aware of when it comes to some of this that we'll talk about. But a lot of people are going to put a lot of different stuff out there, and a lot of it is just going to be misinformation. Some of it, if they have sources, and when someone's like, I have like 5, 6, 7 sources, don't listen to them. You know, there's a lot of agendas out there, whether it's media people, whether it's honestly league executives too. People around the league try and tell me things. And sometimes I'm like, you're doing this for a purpose, and I'm not going to put it out there because I don't need to be like used in a sense or part of it. I put it out when I do think it is relevant to y'all and like important to know. There's a lot of stuff that you can tell is just like an exec trying to do something. I don't think that negotiation in the media really works. Executives around the league tend to have like a good idea of what other people think and know and want and all of that, and what offers are out there and those sorts of things. But there's going to be a lot of that over the coming week, let's say. And a lot of it's going to center around Brandon Ingram. I still don't think there's a lot of traction on any sort of deal. We looked at Toronto in yesterday's show, and they could be interested. But I also said I don't really see that making a ton of sense, given some of the moves they made last season of trading off players arguably better than Brandon Ingram. So if that's the case, at least Siakam, like if that's the case, why would you try and get worse by using some of those assets? Unless it's just, yeah, he's so cheap, there's no reason not to. And the trades we put out there yesterday are basically like there's almost no risk for Toronto to make a move like that. But you're going to be seeing Brandon Ingram used as leverage in Jimmy Butler talks. Oh, a team doesn't want to give up all the stuff or want to deal with Jimmy Butler, so we'll pivot to Brandon Ingram. We can't get De'Aaron Fox, let's go after Brandon Ingram, right? I don't think a lot of that's actually going to be truthful. The people that I tend to trust are obviously the people from ESPN. You know, Bobby Marks, Brian Windhorst is pretty good too. Shams is obviously maybe the best, but I also trust Mark Stein. I trust Jake Fisher. And those are like the people I really trust. If you see some other names out there, be a little bit questioning when it comes to that. Because I don't think there's going to be, maybe a deal gets done. Ingram's very clearly close to returning. I said 2 weeks ago, he could play in an NBA game right now if it was like do or die game 7 in the NBA finals or something like that. It's going to be interesting to see what the Pelicans do. I guarantee you, everyone will guarantee you, they're going to make a trade. They're not paying the luxury tax. There's zero reason for this team to pay the luxury tax right now. Go collect your check. I get it. And then invest it into the team, which they do. They spent a lot of money renovating the facility and all of that over the past off season here. So there will be a trade. Just be prepared for smaller moves right now. This team does not need to try and mortgage any piece of the future, nor should they. Unless you can get that elite center that you think you can get that's a piece next season, you don't need to go and make that sort of move right now. No one's also going to really be available here. You might wait to see what happens to the Cavs in the playoffs, what happens to the Indiana Pacers in the playoffs, if you're looking at Jarrett Allen, if you're looking at Myles Turner. All of those are moves that will be made in the offseason, and I still think you can probably get a pretty similar return for Brandon Ingram in the offseason that you would be able to get at the trade deadline right now. I don't think the offers will go up, and they still won't be good, but it can be at least what you have right now, and I think that is kind of worth maybe holding on to him then too, and having a little bit more leverage in negotiations. Actually, maybe they get a little bit better in the offseason. If a team's like, we want Ingram, let's make this happen. Well, the only way that team's going to be able to do it is through a signing trade, which gives New Orleans a little bit more leverage to get the things they want back in a trade. Otherwise, they can just let Brandon Ingram go sign a mid-level exception deal, and he might not do it with that team. And that's kind of what maybe Ingram is going to be looking at a little bit. I've been saying that since the offseason. We'll see what ends up happening this coming off season, though. So be wary of the smoke screens and all of that coming through the next week. We'll make sense of all the rumors here. We're going to be keeping an eye on everything. So make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Pelicans wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow. We are going to talk some trades and things like that. De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, others as well. It's in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. I'll see y'all then.